Okay, so as I was saying, depression is one of the most frequent problems that older adults go to psychotherapy for. So obviously, if you're thinking about depression and the aging process, to sort of a recap of what we've been talking about, we could really think about primary prevention, so trying to stop the depression before it actually occurs, or if it does occur, then sort of fixing the depressions through some sort of, again, highly likely is going to be through some sort of hope therapy. One of the reasons why it's so important to try and use preventative measures or primary preventative measures is because there's still this stigma related to mental health treatment, and it may impede people from actually even seeking out treatment in the first place. So, I mean, obviously, it goes without saying that if we can, prevent a problem before it ever manifests, that's ideal. But particularly because, prolonged treatment, prolonging treatment until the problem, arises is very severe. So what I think we would hope that one of the major next goals is for positive psychology is to help sort of lessen the stigma that people feel about going to mental health facilities or receiving mental health treatment, so that they can feel like they will be able to sort of receive that secondary sort of prevention program that they need. The last half of this, we really want to sort of look at the sort of other side of this. So, if you remember, one of the very first slides, was this great drawing where we look at sort of this bell-shaped curve, and on the left side of the distribution, we have sort of what's going wrong, and in many ways, primary prevention and secondary prevention are really trying to reduce the likelihood that you end up on the left side of the curve. But what primary enhancement and secondary enhancement are trying to do is move a person to the right side of the curve, move them over to some sort of state of flourishing. You could really think of sort of primary enhancement as moving from the middle of the distribution closer, but not to fully peak experiences, and we can sort of think about well-being in sort of two different types of ways, right? So if we're going to try and produce optimal functioning and satisfaction, we can think about maximizing our hedonic well-being, or our pleasure, the sort of hedonic primary enhancement strategies, or our eudaimonic well-being, really emphasizing sort of functioning and happiness as desirable through the goal pursuit process, really through maybe more purpose-driven instead of less pleasure-driven types of activities. Interestingly, if you want to think about, well, how would we move people from sort of functioning to flourishing, one of the good places to start, and this will sort of set up a lot of what we're going to talk about in this lecture, an evolutionary premise is that pleasure is related to propagation, that essentially mating and being close to individuals that will allow us to propagate will ultimately bring us the greatest sort of pleasure. And in that, happiness then stems from the types of environments that are ultimately fertile and productive, in allowing us to propagate. So you think about safe and supportive living environments, a fertile environment that there's a lot of food, even exercise in sort of pursuit of meaningful work. These are all ultimately going to likely increase the likelihood that we will mate and propagate, and therefore this is where a lot of the pleasurable types of activities come from. So if we're thinking about hedonic primary enhancement, we have to sort of think about pleasure as related to propagation. But what I think that really sort of sets up here is the most powerful sources of well-being really come from relationships, not just relationships with our lovers, but with our friends and our family. We really could say that the sort of most crucial element to a satisfying life is our relationships. So when we engage in shared activities, when we're engaged in sort of novel activities or intrinsically motivated activities, particularly with individuals who we are close to, these are the moments in our life where we're sort of feeling the most happiness, the most joy, and the sort of most satisfaction. And you can even argue that some of the correlates between, say, happiness and religiosity, and happiness and work life are a function of the social aspect. So we know that satisfaction is derived from religious and spiritual types of experiences, but the satisfaction from religion probably stems a lot from the social contacts it actually provides. Also, there's obviously other sorts of benefits, social benefits can't explain the increase in hope that come from religious and spiritual activities, but they certainly are a major ingredient. If we look at employment, a lot of the benefits that come from gainful employment are a result of a strong social network that is provided. So you could almost say if you're satisfied with your work, you probably are really close to your colleagues and your boss. This positive social network is a really important feature of gainful employment, so much so that self-employment is often negatively related to happiness, even though self-employment has lots of other types of benefits that you can think about. Leisure, contemplation, meditation are also psychological types or activities that can produce, psychological health and sort of well-being. But if we're going to end with really, the ultimate goal, which is to augment our sort of already positive states and really find sort of the ultimate in satisfaction, to find what we might call self-actualization, peak experiences, optimal well-being. Well, now we're really talking about the psychological enhancements that are secondary, that are really going to move us in the far part of that tail. And so when we're sort of building on our previous mental health into something just beyond health, or well beyond health, into sort of maximizing pleasure and well-being, then we're really talking about secondary enhancements, trying to make life as good as possible. We experience these types of states and moments really in some of the stuff that we've talked about before. So in flow states, when we're really absorbed in a task, we really have these sort of peak psychological moments. Frankl said that in sort of an existentialist contemplation of life's meanings, particularly during suffering, that we experience, sort of this self-actualization that we might call the sort of life at its best. Even in normal competitions in day-to-day life, when people win, we have this sort of feeling of this sort of pure joy of competition that can come even from sort of a menial sort of task. Working again together within others, whether we're doing something collectively and working together and triumphing, or we're helping others through volunteering, or even just observing others in a sort of way that makes us feel elevated, or a sense of awe, seeing something that's sort of awe-inspiring. All of these types of things are really sort of life at its best. So when we think of secondary, physical sorts of enhancements, we can think about sort of this example of, the goal is to have an attainment of a peak level of physical health. It's going well beyond just sort of being well conditioned. It's far surpassing those people who sort of regularly exercise. And that sort of physical enhancement is the analogy that we want to draw with sort of psychological enhancement. It's not just being in good shape, it's being in our best shape, it's being in our peak shape. And of course that's going to be different for each individual person. Of course, there's some caveats here. People can become addicted to sort of peak experiences, and so part of what you may want to do is really balance sort of mundane activities in life with these different types of personal experiences. And certainly, if you're going to become a life coach, you need to be concerned with the attainment of too much of peak experiences, because some of life just can't be that good, unfortunately. So some things to think about as we close. There's really this sort of two enhanced parallels in psychology, sort of avoiding the harmful outcomes and attaining the beneficial outcomes, this approach and avoidance motivation. But we want to keep those in balance. I think that's ultimately the way that we'll experience enhancement.